Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on Bank Holiday Monday, so hopefully you've got time off. But me and Samuel are going to look back on United's 1-1 draw against Fulham at Craven Cottage in the Premier League. We were both down in London for the game. Samuel, there was positives to take last weekend, even though it was a 1-0 defeat against Arsenal. But this felt a little bit more like last season. Is that a fair assessment?
Certainly is, and with the first game of the season, the first performance, there were, as you say, there were positives for me. I'm always wary of trying to get the balance right, where United have just lost a game. I remember when they lost to Arsenal 1-0 a couple of seasons ago. It wasn't that long ago, about 15 months ago. The day where there was the mother of all rainstorms, and Eric Ten Hag was drenched at the end of the game. And Ten Hag was really positive in the press conference afterwards, and it was Neil Custis who said, "I don't mean to be negative, Eric, but you have just lost a game." And it was that's always something that you've got to be mindful of, especially with United. If they've lost at home, it's that has to be factored into the analysis. I think, strangely, where they didn't lose yesterday, I think the feeling is, certainly from speaking to supporters and fans after the game, there does feel a more downbeat mood, which isn't a surprise in that they were 1-0 up. They became 2 withdrawn after scoring, and the equaliser was eminently avoidable. There was a lot to unpick there, a lot of issues with it. But also the game management, and Amram did reflect on this afterwards, and he's not daft. He acknowledged that up until they scored, United's performance was pretty good, quite decent. After that, there were issues. But part of the issues were his game management, in that 4 of the substitutes who came on in the second half were defensive players. And yes, Diogo Dalot was sent on to provide some more natural width down the right-hand side. He did win the corner, albeit via a pretty poor cross. Harry Maguire came close to scoring. When Maguire went on, you knew it wasn't going to be just to defend. It was to be a set-piece threat as well. But when you resort to those measures in the second game of the season, it does flag issues, and there are a lot of issues in the United side. Probably not quite from back to front, because I think the central defence looks in pretty robust shape. But the midfield was an issue yesterday. The attack, I said about it last week, and it's become even more of an issue where they've gone 90 more minutes without a Manchester United player scoring. So you can't ignore these things, and it is strange how that pre-season optimism, it is starting to fizzle out already, even though there's nothing to panic about, I wouldn't say. And I think that some of the issues are repairable. I think certain people are going overboard about Fernandes' role in midfield, for instance. I don't think that is a big problem. I think the problem is who he's playing with, and also the optics of it. When you've got 2 30-somethings in a 2-man midfield, whether it's Burnley or whether it's Fulham, whether it's Arsenal, they're going to think you're gettable there. And United were gettable there, to the point that the older midfielder had to come off because he was probably going to get sent off, Casemiro, which we've seen before. He's had to come off in games where he's walking a tightrope and already on a yellow card. But people can be as tactical and analytical as they like, but the fact of the matter is this team is still struggling to score goals, and that's all it boils down to. And they are a paradoxical side, because without a striker, they do actually play some decent stuff, and they have done. Then they look fluid rather than rigid, and there's been a lot to get behind. I thought Mason Mount had his most accomplished hour in a United shirt yesterday, but that front three have not scored in 2 games now. And if you want to extend it into pre-season, that sudden switch from going from a system that has a striker in it to a system that does not have a striker in it, they have literally not won a game. And it's not a coincidence. And yes, a couple of those games didn't mean a lot, but they were using those games to prepare themselves for the start of the season. And the start of the season has been a full start, unfortunately.
United started well. They came up fast, didn't it? And the passing was slick. They were playing for purpose. And as you said, that front three, they look very fluid again. They did against Arsenal. They were combining well. We made that point last week on the podcast. But the bottom line is they didn't score. It's fine margins, though, because, I mean, Kuna hits the post. That could go in another day. He then draws that save from Leno. I mean, I think he should have scored that for me. It was a good save, but I think he should have scored. And if those two chances are taken, I guess you 2-0 up, bang, bang. Theoretically, the game should be wrapped up. Kuna was still a bright spot for me, Samuel. I thought he was good. Fernandes obviously has that missed penalty in the 36th or 7th minute. When Fernandes misses a penalty, you do start to think, oh, is this not their day? Because he's usually so calm and composed from the spot. That was his 5th penalty miss, wasn't it, for the club? But usually I would say he's a banker when he steps up to take it. There was obviously that kind of incident with the referee. He bumped them slightly, which he referenced in his post-match interview. But it was interesting that he changed his technique, wasn't it? He usually kind of takes penalties with a hop, skip and a jump. And it was a bit different yesterday.
Well, the problem Fernandes has got is that if there's a player who is not going to gain any sympathy from referees, it's him. It's not like he's been their best friend over the years. If someone bumps into you, they should, look, on a human level, on an etiquette level, they should apologise. So, okay, the referee should have apologised. But as Fernandes said himself, that didn't legislate for him putting the ball in the River Thames with his penalty. And so, although it was a good quote for us, and it was probably the best quote from all the post-match roundups, it was something that really he shouldn't have bothered going down that route. And the fact that he even used the word triggered, which feels like a very modern word and a very social media word as well, I think it's just kind of, it just adds to the absurdity of it, really. Ultimately, this was a player who had converted a few penalties in pre-season, and then when it comes to the meaningful one, he didn't convert it, and it is a rarity. He scored 38 penalties for United. He is their record penalty scorer. I checked it yesterday. He's scored 10 more penalties than Ruud van Nistelrooy, and I think Fernandes has been at United 5.5 years. Van Nistelrooy was there for 5 years, so the rate he's been converting them has been impressive. But he has had penalties saved, and he has missed a penalty like that before against Aston Villa 4 years ago. Now, the dynamics of that one were different in that I can't quite remember. I think he'd missed one, or he hadn't converted one quite recently. But the issue was there was a guy in the team called Ronaldo who has scored a hell of a lot more penalties than Fernandes, and sometimes, whoever's the penalty taker, it goes out the window when this guy comes back into the team. And Emiliano Martinez did get into his head that day because he was saying to Ronaldo, you should take it. Why aren't you taking it? And Fernandes, this within Fernandes' earshot, Fernandes overthinks it. There's more pressure. It's added time. United's 1-0 down. It's at the Stretford end. He blasts it over. I'm pretty sure that was the first penalty he missed at Old Trafford. And of course, supporters had just come back into stadiums as well after the period of being away due to the pandemic. So the psychology of that penalty miss was quite fascinating, I thought, at the time. I wasn't at that game, but I remember the update coming through, and it's obviously a bit of a shock when Fernandes doesn't score a penalty. Yesterday, there's no excuse for that. Okay, his routine was interrupted by the referee. If the referee didn't apologise, that is rude, but referees can be quite rude. I had an issue with one who was absolutely useless during the press game in June, whose officiating did rankle me, to put it mildly. And you have to give them some leeway sometimes because they get an earful all the time, and sometimes they're in the right, sometimes they're in the wrong. But I'm a great believer of politeness, and I think that should apply to just about any human being. So if he didn't apologise, he should have done. But for Fernandes to use the word upset after a referee has interrupted him, given the amount of grief he's given them over the years, it's just you don't really want to go there, Bruno. It's pretty pointless, especially when you've just given the rowers in the Thames something to duck away from.
If it did unsettle him, it does show that he is human, because he is usually so composed from the spot. And as I say, you always think it's a certainty when he steps up. I was counting my fantasy football points, and I was so disappointed to see it fly over the bar and into the Thames. Okay. There was just one change to the starting 11, Samuel. Ahmad coming into the side for Dalot. That wasn't really consequential. The same could probably be said about Altay Bayindir starting, because he was absolutely terrible from corners. He's a disaster. He almost wets the bed, doesn't he, when a ball's played into the box? But his performance didn't really have an effect on the game. He made a few simple saves and he had no chance with Smith Rowe's equaliser. But where does that leave Onana? Before we get into Sesko and some positives and the rest of the bits and bobs, should we just briefly touch on this goalkeeping situation? Because it was big news before kickoff. There was no sign of animosity between the pair as they warmed up. Goalkeepers are famously tight with each other. Onana had a smile on his face. But Amrin persisted with Bayindir. I mean, I disagree with that selection myself. I actually said that before the game, and I was surprised to see a lot of fans say they would have started Bayindir over Onana. It's a case of a lesser of two evils, but I would have had Onana starting every day.
Are they Fenerbahce fans or Turkish fans? I mean, crikey. There's not a logical reason to start Bayindir. It is absolutely nothing personal. It's nothing. There's nothing untoward. There's no agenda, despite all the paranoid lot out there and thinking that journalists have agendas from time to time. He is not the second best Manchester United goalkeeper, never mind the best Manchester United goalkeeper. Onana has been training for ages, and all it does is it fuels the uncertainty, because they're looking to sign a goalkeeper. You can't have 4 senior goalkeepers in the squad this season. Perhaps there'll be a loan arrangement for is it Lamans? Need to get the pronunciation perfect there, but maybe like as Liverpool did with their goalkeeping signing last year, maybe you sign him and then you just leave him on loan at his club, and then they come in a year later. I'm not too sure, but you can't have 4 senior goalkeepers. Bayindir is by far and away the easiest to shift, because he only costs 4.3 million or whatever it was 2 years ago. Tom Heaton is 40, hasn't played in 2.5 years. He signed a 1-year contract in June. Andre Onana would be the most difficult to shift, and the way Amrim is going about it would suggest that he would like him out of the way. Yet, are people at United seriously going to have? Are they seriously going to have, frankly, an unknown Belgian goalkeeper and a Turkish goalkeeper as their 2 main goalkeepers for the season? I find that quite startling. And look, Onana has been a startling presence over the past 2 years. He's made a lot of mistakes. He's not perfect. I think the intention, as I wrote at the start of the year, the profile of keeper that they wanted someone who's going to push Onana. And I think the profile of going for a Royal Antwerp goalkeeper who's got into the Belgium squad this year and is going to be around that setup, given his age as well, 23, that is the kind of profile and the price he's likely to fetch. That does make a lot of sense. But of course, Onana, since the start of the year, he's made more errors and bad errors, and he's not had a good time of it whatsoever with United, and he's had an injury and now he's not getting in the team. So it's possible that Amrim's opinion of Onana has evolved. As far as Onana is concerned, I was told at the weekend he is 100% staying at United. And when you hear that from the people that I'm speaking to and others are speaking to, you think that sounds quite cut and dry. But then he's out of the team yesterday, and all of a sudden it feels like he's the likeliest of the goalkeepers to leave United, because if you want Bayindir out, why would you be playing him? And I know you can talk about resale value or stuff like that, but if that was the case, they should be starting Rasmus Højlund, who is actually someone they should have been starting in recent games if Sesko wasn't fit enough, because he's a striker, and we've seen how costly it's been for them playing without a striker. They've not won a game, and none of the starters in the past 4 games have actually scored a goal from open play. Since United returned to England from the tour, the 2 goals they've scored have been own goals, which tells its own story. So there's an issue up front.
Is that an example of Amram being stubborn then, Samuel? Sorry to interrupt, because he's obviously made a decision on Højlund, and you've made the point a few times in the last 2 weeks that it's actually not been helpful to omit him from the squad and kind of move him out of the team because of the way the system was geared up in pre-season. And then with Fernandes as well, we all know he's not perfect. We all know he's flawed and he can make mistakes, but he's a better option than Bain there. And it feels like he's made these decisions potentially on Onana, because we don't know that's his final decision, but seemingly on Højlund. And he's going for these different options, and they're not actually the best for the team, but he's doing it because he's made the decisions, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I do. I think I said last week, with Højlund, he's cut his nose to spite his face there.
It's a good way to put it, yeah.
Højlund is still training with the first team. He's not in the bomb squad, and he clearly won't be as well, where the transfer window closes in a week's time. But I was told at some point last season by someone who knows Amram, the Portuguese, they said that he has a hard brain. And what they meant by that is that he is stubborn to a fault. And you have seen that with some of the decisions he has made. And the majority of them, those big calls, they have been, I think they've been for the good of Manchester United. I think taking Højlund out of the team just because he said to a few of us in the mix zone, he doesn't have a choice to make. He's here to stay. I don't think that has been for the good of United, because look at the way the form has gone since then, where they've not won a game. The goals have dried up. When let's face it, they won 2 games out of 5 in pre-season. They had a good pre-season, definitely. It was uplifting. They played some good stuff, and they didn't lose a game. The 2 games they won were with Højlund starting. And in the first, he hit the post in the first minute. In the second, he got 2 goals. And while you've got him, maximise him. And also, if you don't end up selling him, he's not a bad backup striker, because that's the role he should have always had at United. It's not ideal, him and Sesko both being born the same year, having the same profile. As a first choice striker and number 2 striker, you'd want there to be a bit of an age gap ideally, but it's not worked out that way. And of course with Xerxes, who didn't get a kick again yesterday, which I'm not too surprised by because he's had so little football in recent months. But if you know, Amram is a very candid guy, but he did pretty much fib about Højlund the previous week when he was talking about, you know, it's just different options for different games, blah blah blah. Højlund is clearly match fit and could come on in a game. Xerxes clearly cannot come on in a game because he's not fit enough. So although they're naming 9 substitutes, in effect it's 8 really. It's probably lower than that because, let's face it, Tyler Fredrickson is never going to come on unless there's a defensive injury crisis all of a sudden. So suddenly that would be my concern with Amram at the moment. There are a couple of big decisions he's made that I genuinely do not think are for the best of the team or the squad. And he clearly is of the opposite opinion. He thinks that it's better to continue with buying dear. And maybe, you know, there's a bit of him bristling, thinking, you know, why should I just change a goalkeeper who made one mistake? And I think that there's an issue with it, with all the jostling around and what have you. You know, people can, when someone is set on something, it can take a lot to, you know, get them to change their mind or to open their eyes to the different, to the other possibilities. But it was not, I think he said before the game at Fulham that he's just talking, I'm just looking at the best players to win the game, which is a bit of a stock phrase that he uses. But I'm not being facetious when I mention Tom Heaton again. There is no way a guy who has played for Rochdale, for Cardiff, played at all these Football League clubs and was managed by Sean Dyche at Burnley for years, there is no way that guy would get bullied at corners. And the chances are his kicking would be just as decent and his shot stopping would be just as decent. He is a better goalkeeper than Bayindir. But the fact of the matter is, Onana is fit, he's available, he should have been starting at Fulham, and he should be starting the 2 games this week as well.
And just lastly on Bairndale, we'll make the point that last season when Onana had a wobble, we were making the case for him to be given a chance to play games. Yeah. And then he was given a chance and he was unconvincing, he disappointed. So, and we've seen enough of him now to make an opinion. So it's no surprise we're saying what we're saying. We'll move on then, because Sesko was on the bench again. I think we all expected him to make his first start for the club, but he came on in the 53rd minute when Amram made a double change. It's interesting, isn't it? You spend £66 million on a striker, a team that scored 44 Premier League goals last season, and you start your two first games of the season without that striker who's been signed to fix the team's struggles to score goals. He looked a bit rusty when he came on, but I think United need to get him firing as soon as possible. And to do that, surely he's got to be starting games to give himself the best chance to get up to speed and up and running.
I mean, they're a team crying out for a striker who have stopped playing with a striker. Then they signed a striker. They're still not playing a striker, and they're still not scoring. I think Amram has mismanaged that situation purely because he's bristled at what Højlund said is the way I see it and the way others view it as well. I don't think the timing is a coincidence. And when Sesko has been on, United have not been particularly productive, but I'm sure we would all see a different Sesko if he comes out for the Premier League anthem, lines up, shakes hands, and he's on the pitch for kickoff. And then he's going to get an hour minimum probably to play. I'd always do that with a new signing if they've had ample training time. And yes, he didn't have much of a pre-season whatsoever. He played 45 minutes for RB Leipzig. So he's bound to be a bit rusty, and he's moved to a league that is a lot quicker than the Bundesliga, which is something that Amram touched upon yesterday. But if you've got that training time, and Amram made a point last week of saying how important it is to have full weeks without any midweek interruptions, and you've got all that time on the training ground to perfect patterns and routines and what have you. And Sesko has had that time, in which case I would argue that it's more logical to start him than to bring him on. Yesterday it was slightly earlier than the Arsenal game, wasn't it? I think it was about 13 minutes earlier because and I admired Amram for that. It was prompted by the Casemiro walking a tightrope, but he just thought if I've got to take him off, I might as well make another attacking change as well with by putting Sesko on, and then of course Mount dropped back into midfield. But again, if we're talking about Amram's stubbornness, he does love Mount. That's the word he's used, and he started him again yesterday. And I thought Mount played really well. I thought he was probably one of United's three best players, along with Cunha and Lenny Yoro. And this is the paradox: the front three are playing quite decently and easy on the eye and very watchable, but they're not scoring goals. And United haven't won any of their first two games.
It's like they need to start Sesko.
They wanted a striker, and they signed a striker, and then they don't play a striker. There are a lot of contradictions going on there, and maybe it will settle once the transfer window's closed and the players have come back from international duty, and the squad is. They know what they've got. They know who's staying until January at the very earliest. But it feels like they've caused problems of their own making, because it's not like they're depleted or they've got an injury crisis. They've got £200 million worth of forwards to choose from, and look, two of them have been starting in the games, and there are obvious reasons why Sesko hasn't started. But I just don't think Amram's gone the right way about it, of just taking a striker out of the team altogether. And I completely understand why they're looking to sell Højlund. He is not good enough to lead the line for Manchester United. I've said that repeatedly. He's scored 3 goals in his past 35 games for the club. But the fact of the matter is, this is a team this system is geared up to service a striker. And that's what they were doing in the first few games of pre-season. Then Højlund said something at Soldier Field to us, and it's changed. And I said that after the Everton game in Atlanta, as good a game as it was, and the quality of the pre-season matches were quite high in that Premier League summer series. But I said at the time, surely it's more beneficial for a team to actually play with a striker when they're warming up to welcome a new striker. And look at what's happened since. United have stopped scoring.
Maybe they can sneak 12 players on the pitch, because Mbeumo, Kuna and Mount do look slick and really combine well, but maybe just get Sesko on in front of them and no one will notice. Maybe that's the solution. Lenny Yoro was a huge positive, I thought, Samuel. He was the man of the match for me. I thought he was excellent. He really grew in confidence last season, I think, with each month. Obviously ended the season strongly, had that little injury, but he was on the left side, really, wasn't he? I think in the spring, earlier this year. But that right side position at the back three is essentially nailed for him right now, isn't it? And I can't see it changing going forward. He made a brilliant recovery. The ball was played over the top, over his head toward Josh King, he is quite fast. The acceleration was impressive. He got in behind Yoro, and Yoro somehow recovered. It was brilliant. And then moments later, I think probably 8 minutes later, it goes up the other side of the pitch, puts United ahead to break the deadlock. It was a bit fortunate because it was heavily deflected, but a good goal nonetheless, and he did well to beat Bassi. Bassi wasn't happy, was he, with the challenge, but I would probably say he has to be stronger in that scenario. So another good performance from Yoro, Samuel, and we're really seeing the signs of a brilliant young centre-back, I think.
He's had a good calendar year. It had to get better after that performance against Southampton all the way back in January. When was it Suleimana, I think, had him on toast that night, and that was a real baptism of fire, even though he'd started a few games and made his debut a month earlier, having been out for, 4 months with a fractured metatarsal. But he was always going to have, last season was always going to be a bit of a gimme for him because he arrived as an 18-year-old and it's his first season at Manchester United. It's, the senior players have got to be stepping up and helping him. But he does look like he has the complete package, and where he's still quite a raw talent, where he's 19, he will fill out a little bit more. He will become more muscular. I don't know whether he can have any more growth spurts at this stage of his life, but he's a good presence as it is. And that tackle yesterday did remind me a little bit. There was I think it was a last-ditch tackle at Anfield last season, which he timed impeccably in the penalty area up at the Kop.
Rich said, could you imagine Eric Bailly trying to do that challenge? Like, it would have ended in a disaster, wouldn't it? When he's straight red card, and
he'd have probably I don't know, put the opponent out for the rest of the season, got sent off and put him out for the rest of the season, knowing the way he went about defending quite often for United. But look, with Yoro, I suppose the biggest compliment you can pay him is that I don't think anybody's going to mention his €70 million fee in incredulous tones. I don't think that's ever going to be an issue as long as he's at United, because he does look a pretty sound investment. And that decision to quite suddenly go from Jared Branthwaite, who they had a couple of bids rejected for, to Lenny Yoro, who hadn't played in the Premier League, was younger, and all of a sudden seemed to come out of nowhere. That looks a really shrewd move by United. I certainly know out of those two who I'd want in my back line.
It was a bit concerning though, wasn't it? The fact that United go ahead 1-0 up away from home, and you think, right, can they get another? Can they start control this game and take the sting out of Fulham a bit? But Fulham kind of grew in confidence, and they thought they could get straight back into it, and they started to create a lot more chances. And then for the goal itself, Dallow's touch was really sloppy, wasn't it? And then Fernandes fails to track Smith Rowe into the box. And I think, you've made this point yourself before, when Fernandes has an off day, United tends to have an off day. He misses a penalty. He fails to track a runner in the box. It wasn't a good day for Fernandes.
And he had a really good pre-season. So again, we need to make our mind up. Is pre-season meaningless? Is it meaningful? I mean, for players, teams, they have to treat it as proper preparation for a new season. I think the performances and the whether it's the teams or individuals, they can always easily be dismissed. And Fernandes did play well, and as soon as the season started, he's not been at it really. He was poor against Arsenal, and he was probably worse yesterday. But it was Alex Iwobi who said afterwards, pretty much like, we know how United play. The defenders like to step up. We can get behind the midfielders. There's space to exploit there. And it was good game management from Marco Silva to put Smith Rowe on. And fair dues to him. The timing of his run was impeccable there to just blindside Fernandes. I think it was certainly Fernandes more at fault than Luke Shaw. Luke Shaw was obviously quite close to him, but if someone's breaking from deep to get onto an in-swinging cross, you've got to expect someone to track their runner, and Fernandes didn't do that. But United just don't. They're not well set in midfield, and I maintain I don't think Fernandes is the problem. I agree. I thought it was excessive to sign 2 number 10s in the summer. I absolutely think they should have gone for Cunha. They should have gone for Mbeumo. But as I said before, I'd have started Mbeumo on the wing. But I don't think that United were ever going to do that with a player who scored 20 Premier League goals last season. That, I still suspect, will be an outlier in Mbeumo's career. I think he'll do incredibly well to get 20 Premier League goals in a season for Manchester United, having done it for Brentford. He's a really good player, brilliant player. I really, really like him. But you look at his goals tallies, and it does strike one as possibly being an anomaly, which is why I always thought United need a good right winger, put him on the wing and allow Ahmad to occupy one of the number 10 roles with Cunha, and of course Fernandes can play there every now and then as well. And Fernandes has played brilliantly from midfield in back 3s and back 4s. He's done it for United. He's done it for Portugal. I don't think he's suddenly become a bad midfielder or he's the problem. The problem is the other guy in that two. It's Casemiro. He should not be starting games. He's redundant. Will not good enough to play in the Premier League. Club media last week were practically celebrating the fact that he's staying for his final year. This is a guy who will not be a Manchester United player this time next year. He will be released because they're not. If they trigger the extension in his contract, then that hierarchy should all be sacked or all resign. Because why on earth would you make that decision? He's not had a properly good Premier League performance in probably 18 months, there or thereabouts. His best form last season was in the Europa League, which I said at the start of last season, pre-season, that Casemiro looks quite good in pre-season, but of course it's like walking football. He's bound to, and the pace in Europe is always slower than in the Premier League. And for a guy who's won 4 or 5 Champions Leagues, he should be cutting it in the Europa League. But in the Premier League, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. And we've seen that with Sesko already. He's got to adapt to the pace of it. Casemiro has had a few years in England already, but he's also an ageing midfielder. He turns 34 in February. A serious team that want to qualify for the Champions League cannot have a 34-year-old defensive midfielder starting week in, week out, even if he did win it 4 or 5 times with Real Madrid. That's in the distant past now. And look, yesterday he came off earlier than he did against Arsenal because Amorim clearly and quite understandably thought that he was at risk of getting sent off and United being reduced to 10 men. And that was a measure that Ten Hag had to take a couple of times midway through his second season, I think it was. The game at Luton stands out. He was very lucky not to get sent off that day. So it was happening 18 months ago, and that Amorim had to make a similar decision there. This all reflects dreadfully on Manuel Ugarte, of course. Ten Hag wasn't sold on him. Amorim coached him at Sporting Lisbon. Now he's benched him. Ugarte just looks completely drained of confidence. He lacks authority when he does come on in games. I'm sure he'll start against Grimsby on Wednesday night, but then I suspect we're all expecting him to be back on the bench for the Burnley game on Saturday. It just feels like there are people at United that have just outright given up on him.
Fernandes and Mount moved into deeper midfield, into the pivot, after the changes were made. If Mount can play there and partner Fernandes, why can't Mainoo? Would be my train of thought. Amram's came out.
Mount was playing well.
He was, and we'll give him his flowers for that. And he definitely was. And I'm not criticising the change because, again, it made complete sense. And Mount was having a very good game. But if Mount can play there, I think it's logical that Mainoo can play there too. I think the profiles aren't too different for that role. Amram came out and he says that Mainoo is essentially challenging Fernandes for one of those roles. And then the other side of the partnership, other players are challenging for starts. But Mainoo's probably scratching his head. And it shouldn't be a thing each week. We can't be sitting here. We made the point, didn't we, that we couldn't rush the panic stations, and Amram needs to have time to prove you can use Mainoo. And I think we'll make a fuller assessment in a few months. But Mainoo was an unused substitute again. Maguire and Heaven are introduced in the 87th minute. Again, you probably understand the Maguire introduction because you can add a goal. But did Heaven have to come on? Could Mainu have not been introduced? He's capable of big moments. We've seen that in the Europa League. A brilliant goal against Liverpool at Old Trafford. He can score. I thought that was interesting.
That's not going to wash with anyone. The supporters and Putney were chanting attack, attack, attack in the 83rd minute, and 4 minutes later, 2 centre-backs came on. You can maybe cut Amram some slack for Maguire, but from his perspective, I'm sure he'll say it was to manage defenders' workloads, and that's why Yoro and Shaw came off. But if you ask Lenny Yoro and Luke Shaw, like, could you have stayed on for 10 more minutes as United tried to win a game? I'm sure they'd have been absolutely fine. Today, we're speaking on Monday, it's a recovery day for the starters. They'll just be winding down at Carrington. They'll be doing their stretches. They'll be in the jacuzzi, in the sauna, in the new steam room. They are not going to have a taxing day today. I suspect they won't be starting at Grimsby on Wednesday. They will be starting against Burnley on Saturday. So it's a 6-day break. Just it's not a good look in a team that has won 7 out of 29 Premier League games and struggles to score goals, that you're putting 2 defenders on with the game deadlocked at 1-1. And look, he was close to Maguire being the saviour again, because Maguire was closer to scoring than Sesko. But
Maguire's probably fine though, isn't he? I think,
yeah.
I mean, you saw it in Nottingham Forest away last season when he came on, he was a real threat. Like, it is logical, but to add Heaven alongside Maguire, I think that's probably a little bit too far. I think you could have added an attacking player on there.
Well, Mainu was the obvious one. I mean, Xerxes, as I said, you have to question why he's even travelling, because he's clearly not regarded as being an option. And it just seems convenient that, we can put him on the bench, and then that means Højlund doesn't have to be on the bench. And again, I think that goes back to Amram's stubbornness. But Mainu has got a goal in him. To have not used him in either of these 2 games is people have clearly got an issue with that, and it is still early, and you want to see how it pans out over a couple more months before hitting the panic button there if you're a United fan. And I certainly hope, just for the workload, from the perspective of workload, that nothing does happen over the next week there with him. I think it would be madness to even entertain the prospect of trying to sell Kobbie Mainu with 7 days left in the transfer window. I think that would go against the ethos of United, and also it would show just how unprepared they are. And I get that in certain areas they do look at they are light. They don't look in great shape in midfield and in goal. But Mainu he's a project that Amram should be embracing, rather than just saying, I'm gonna. He's in competition with Fernandes, and let's face it, I think, has Fernandes ever actually been dropped for United? I think there's one game that sticks out that he may have been dropped for, but I'm really struggling now to. I'm racking my brains trying to think.
Well, if he's telling the truth of that quote, it means Mainu's never going to play it, doesn't it? Essentially, because Fernandes always starts.
Unless he comes in as one of the 2 number 10s, which also feels unlikely because they've got they have got a plethora of them.
And it feels like he'd moved and kind of settled on playing Mainu in the deeper position this summer, didn't it? With his pre-season performances and where he was playing them. So yeah, it is interesting. I hope we've got the tone and the kind of balance right to reflect the performance, because it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? In the sense that there's a lot of positivity in pre-season. It was very upbeat going into the new campaign. They lose against Arsenal, but there was clear positives to take. But they have to do better against sides like Fulham if they want to qualify for Europe. You've got to be doing a lot better in those games. Is it dramatic to say that Amram needs results now? It is a results business at the end of the day. And when you look at the schedule, obviously Grimsby in the second round of the Carabao Cup this week, and then Burnley before the international break. But when United return, it's the Manchester derby, and then you've got Chelsea at home. It's going to be a big few weeks coming up, isn't it? I mean, it always feels like it is at United, but especially in this context.
They're always big, but the problem is, since the start of the season, the problem for Amram is that he's been mentioned in the same breath as Paul Hart and Neil Warnock. Now,
I mean, Neil Warnock, that's a compliment.
Well, some would say it is until you inform them that his win percentage in the Premier League is the same as Neil Warnock's, which is a worry. There are some absolutely striking stats where you look at them and you think, my God, if he's a success at United, it will be a roaring success just because of where he's come from. I mean, he's not at the brink at all or anything like that, but 7 Premier League wins out of 29. It's like you look at those wins and it's like a trail of breadcrumbs that have been scattered, and now the trail has just stopped. The first 2 wins were against Everton, City in December. Then it was Southampton and Fulham in January. You had Ipswich in February, Leicester in March, Villa in May, and that's it. That when you look at it in those terms, that is so damning.
I was writing that up, Samuel, because after speaking to Dorga, I wanted to see how many games United had won in the Premier League after his arrival. And it was just the 3. So
yeah, and is it like Lenny Oro's got that kind of years ago when Gareth Bale was first at Tottenham, he didn't win a Premier League game in his first, I think it was his first few years at the club or something, first couple of years. It was a long time until he actually played in a Premier League win under them. And of course, Yoro's in a similar situation now where he's still yet to play in a Premier League game that United have won, which isn't a reflection on him whatsoever, of course. But this is what it boils down to. Look, the supporters are clearly fully behind Amorim. They're not in danger of turning. I'm speaking to a couple of friends. They are possibly resigned to him not cutting it, not making, not bringing the glory days again as the chant goes. But the support is still very, very present and very vocal. But he has to start winning games. If they have a season like last season, they can't continue with him. And I don't think they will have a season like last season. I don't think they'll finish in the bottom half, which almost sounds like an achievement for United when it wouldn't be whatsoever. They should absolutely be aiming to qualify for the Champions League to get into Europe. That has to be the minimum aim, and they've said that at the club. But it's still early days. That's the one thing that's in their favour, even though elements of these 2 games that they've played already, they do feel like an extension of last season. And that's always going to be a problem at a football club. If you've come off a bad season and it feels like the start of the new season feels like an extension of that season, that is always a pretty big issue.
Yeah, it's not the start everyone was hoping for, but hopefully it gets a bit better in the next few weeks. Thanks very much for your time, Samuel, as usual. We'll be at Grimsby on Wednesday night, which should be interesting. Thank
you. Yes, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, but also quite curious because, of course, when these draws are made, you think, that's wonderful, Manchester United getting to this club. From us selfish journalist perspectives, we are worried about what the setup's going to be like, whether the Wi-Fi will work, whether we'll have a PowerPoint. Yeovil Town did a great job a few years ago when they accommodated us. Cambridge United did not do a good job. Tranmere Rovers were absolutely hopeless. But in their defence, they'd only won their replay against Watford a few days earlier due to a fixture quirk or the weather causing havoc. So, I mean, it's not great for League Two clubs to have 3 days to prepare for the visit of Manchester United.
Wi-Fi was going down after Fernandes' missed penalty because everyone was trying to use it in the press box. So it just shows you can have the Premier League clubs too, I suppose. Yeah, we'll leave it there then. We'll be back later in the week. We skipped a Grimsby preview, as I'm sure you'll be not surprised to hear. Hopefully it's a straightforward fixture for United. We'll be back later in the week, of course, to reflect on that performance and look ahead to the weekend against Burnley. Take care.